Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Ramūnas Vilpišauskas, Jean Monnet Chair Professor at the Institute of International Relations and Political Science of Vilnius University. And I will be moderating this panel, which is on EU's role in the future of Ukraine. And we have excellent speakers for such a topic. We have Mr. Maximise, who is the head of the delegation of the European Union to Ukraine. And we have Dr. Zanda Kalnina-Lukaševica, who is a deputy speaker of the Parliament of the Republic of Latvia. I suggest that we start in the same order as we have in the program. I'll just encourage the audience to send questions via Slido platform. Don't hesitate to ask our speakers who are knowledgeable about the topic, and I'm sure would be glad to respond to your questions. As a way of introduction, I would just start with one comment. When we assess the role of the European Union in assisting Ukraine in its defense and looking into all those various types of assistance that has been provided so far, it seems that as very often it is with the European Union, that the glass is both half full and half empty in terms of whether EU has done enough to help Ukraine. On the one hand, we can speak about remarkable unity of EU 27 member states, and actually the title of today's conference in Riga is about being more united than ever, though with a question mark. On the other hand, we hear a lot of criticism about EU doing too little and too late in terms of helping Ukraine. So I hope you will in your introductory comments reflect on this as well. So I suggest to start with introductory comments of up to 10 minutes in each case, and then we will proceed with Q&As, and I hope there will be questions from the audience as well. So, Mr. Maximise, why don't you start first?
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the invitation, the chance to be at this panel. I've been live at this conference earlier, but now via Zoom from Kiev. Enough. You ask whether this is enough. Enough is when Ukraine wins. And when the country is reconstructed, then is enough. Until then, no resting on the laurels, please. Although, as you also rightly said, the EU has given enormous and is giving enormous assistance and help to Ukraine. It's not a competition, never. But I think the figure in terms of money that the EU has contributed is since the 24th of February last year stands at the 67 billion euro. If you combine the EU Commission member states, we provide 18 billion this year. Executive Vice President Dombrovskis spoke of this as well, I'm pretty sure. Macro-financial assistance, so the EU pays almost half of Ukraine's budget gap for this year. 3.6 billion euro has been allocated from the European Peace Facility And on top of that come member states' bilateral weapon donations, helps, humanitarian assistance. Not easy at all, but I'm very proud of the trade regime or the trade preferences that we have been, again, under the leadership of Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, been able to establish. We have now abolished all tariffs and quotas from Ukraine's export to the EU, and this feat is even more remarkable because Ukraine mainly exports to the EU goods that on pretty sensitive sectors, most notably agriculture. And the Commission has proposed to prolong this, roll over this. But the most important thing, the most important help that that the EU has been providing is something very hard to measure in money, and that's the European perspective and the candidate status for Ukraine. I mean, and this has changed the EU as well. It's no secret that before the 24th of February last year, actually there was virtually no appetite to even discuss extending the invitation to join, extending the European perspective. Now it's there. Within a couple of months, this tremendous shift was done. And this is part of the process of the European Union becoming geopolitical. For geopolitics entails choosing sides. And we have been, I'm very proud that the EU leaders were among the very first one who said, we are on Ukraine's side here and Ukraine needs to win. We have chosen side, and that has profound implications on us as well. Because for the global South, the EU, the West, has chosen a side in this war. And imagine if this side would lose. What would it mean for our reputation and our leverage global? So we better make sure Ukraine wins. At stake, I mean, apart from that is, of course, the whole stability of our neighborhood. And enlargement policy, as we know very well in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Estonia, that the enlargement policy transforms neighboring countries for the better even before the actual accession takes place. So this is already helping Ukraine. And the EU has become to symbolize hope for Ukrainians. 90% of Ukrainians, according to some recent polls, believe that in 10 years' time, Ukraine will be a prosperous country, EU member state. 90%. 80%, more than 80% of these of Ukrainians think that the only way to prosperity for Ukraine is via EU integration, via EU membership. It's fantastic that this hope is so clearly there, but it blows my mind how strong a responsibility this puts on our shoulders, on the EU shoulders. And now I could go into more detail later on if there's interest on how Ukraine is now implementing the EU agenda and working on the 7 recommendations that were linked with this candidate status. The Ukrainian leadership has made it clear that their aim is to deliver on all these recommendations so that by the end of this year, an EU decision to open the accession negotiations could be taken by all member states by consensus. But that's the aim, and I think that's a realistic aim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would definitely like to return later to how those 7 recommendations are being implemented and what are the prospects of actually starting accession negotiations at the end of this year, when the Commission will have to present its opinion on the progress. But before that, I would like to invite Dr. Kalnina Lukashevitsa to share with us her introductory remarks, and then we will discuss those issues in more detail. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you on the same screen and to see all of you. And by that, allow me also to to thank the immediate organizers and all the colleagues of this conference. And this year, indeed, it is truly European and truly Nordic Baltic, where the panel discussions are led from different capitals. And I think it's very difficult to add something after Matti, who is the European face in Kiev. And by staying there, really, I think also helps to increase Ukrainian resilience. And we can also admire, Matti, your own resilience, staying and working in Kiev. And I think it's also symbolic that indeed Europe is the one that helps a lot, that's present in all different means of the world, and that also we can see many European leaders going to Kiev to show their presence. For example, the Latvian Prime Minister was in Kiev just yesterday. Yes, we are helping a lot. We will continue to help a lot, as much as needed, as long as needed. And I think there are the 3 aspects of age. So we need to help to win the war. And it means delivering the weapons, providing microfinancial support, providing humanitarian support, etc., etc. The second help that we need to provide is help to rebuild Ukraine. The major works will definitely happen after Ukraine has and will win. But already today, we need to help to rebuild the immediate infrastructure that's needed for functioning of the Ukraine. But it's not only about reconstruction. I would like to add that we also need to help rebuild the health of the nation. So, I mean, we need to invest in rehabilitation for those who suffered. And we can see that Russians are using not only military weapons, but they are using torture and sexual violence also as a weapon of war. So it means that we need to help Ukrainians who suffered to receive the much needed rehabilitation, and by that to become stronger again. And another aspect of the rebuilding Ukraine is, I think, our duty to help to bring back Ukrainian children to Ukraine. There are thousands and thousands of Ukrainian children who have been illegally brought from Ukraine to Russia. That's again another war crime that Russia is committing. And that's another aspect where we have to focus our attention and our energy to find those children and to do the utmost for the world to let to know these terrible destinies, but also to do the utmost to bring them back to Ukraine. Because just imagining what are these children going through, being brought to Russia, being put into the Russian institutions, where the others definitely know that they are Ukrainians, and I'm afraid are torturing the children there, or allowing them to be adopted to Russian families who definitely then want to make them proper Russians and violate, I'm afraid, their basic human core and attack their identities. That's terrible. So we need to help and to work in this direction. So it means when I talk about rebuilding, it's definitely reconstruction, rehabilitation, and return. But of course, there are many sub-aspects of that. For example, we cannot rebuild before we demine, etc., etc. And the EU, I think, has an obligation to be able to focus on these different tracks and directions of the activities and help we need to provide. And the third aspect is we need to help the Ukraine to join the EU as soon as possible. So that's very important. And yes, we granted the candidate status to Ukraine, and that's huge, but that's not enough. And at the same time, all these steps we are going, they are always facing the first skepticism that it will not go through, and then we managed to find agreement in the EU. I clearly remember, I think it was March 3rd, it could be 1 or 2 days plus or minus, when we had informal General Affairs Council in France taking place. I represented Latvia at that time at this General Affairs Council. Together with our Baltic colleagues and Polish colleagues, we were advocating for granting the candidate status for Ukraine. And it was a week after the war started, and it was perceived as a very radical proposition and met with huge skepticism. But a bit later, the decision was taken, as also all the decisions on sanctioning Russian economy and officials. At the beginning, huge skepticism. At the end of the day, full agreement. And I think this is the direction to continue. We need to be bold and to suggest moving forward much faster than it could be imaginable. But I think it is our duty, it is our obligation to do so. And to conclude, it means that we need to help more for Ukrainians to win the war as soon as possible. We will need to provide all the assistance needed to rebuild Ukraine in all the aspects of that, physical, psychological, etc. And the goal is for Ukraine to become a strong member of the European Union and to prosper as one of our own. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, when you were speaking about Baltic states and Polish support for granting candidate status to Ukraine, I remembered that Lithuanian former twice Prime Minister, who is currently member of the European Parliament, Andrius Kubilius, has already a few years ago has been advocating a Marshall Plan for Ukraine, something which became a popular topic last year only. So in this sense, it's another example of Baltic initiative and leadership in terms of helping Ukraine. Thank you both for your introductory remarks. And as I said, I would like to follow up with what's the current status of those reforms in Ukraine, which are important if we are to start, well, if we are to convince also those who are skeptical among EU member states that at the end of the year, Ukraine should start accession negotiations with the EU. So I suppose Matti has the most recent information on what's What's the status on this? Could you share it with us?
Thanks a lot, Ramūnas. I have to be clear here. It is not up to me to assess the progress. It's for the European Commission, and then to propose its assessment and possibly next steps and conclusions to the member states. What I see in Kyiv is pretty strong determination to deliver on these recommendations. It was like, if I remember correctly, 23rd of June last year was Friday. So the decision was taken to grant the candidate status. And next Monday, President Zelensky gathered all his team, and they agreed to work and to act very quickly, very swiftly on these recommendations, realizing clearly that this is crucial. There is progress, undeniably. On all the 7 recommendations, things have been done, things are being done. And again, the huge upside here is that this has been done hand in hand with the European Commission and with the EU delegation in Kyiv. So the roadmap is much more clear than it used to be. Things that you need to do are much more clear, and we are able to say what in our mind ticks the box and what maybe fully doesn't yet. It's no secret to anybody who follows this that these recommendations very much focusing on the rule of law areas. And the rule of law and the fight against corruption are areas that the situation in Ukraine has in fact improved during the war. First of all, the Ukrainian state proved that it's able to function even in the conditions of a full-scale invasion. Ukrainian democracy functions. The parliament is gathering, the local governments are working, all these functions. And of course, on the battlefield, the Ukrainian state functions brilliantly. So this all has hugely strengthened Ukrainian citizens' trust in their own state. And that's crucial. That's absolutely crucial for any democratic society. Now, corruption at the same time, or logically, has become much more unpatriotic than it used to be. You don't want to cheat the state you believe in, or you've grown to trust. And there are underway a number of anti-corruption cases at the level of deputy ministers and others. So President Zelensky and the whole political elite of Ukraine take these things seriously. So in all these 7 areas, progress has been made. In all these 7 areas, more still needs to be done. And again, it's not up to me to say no. This is done. Maybe the most challenging of these 7 are, first of all, those that are harder to measure. like to build a credible track record on anti-corruption convictions, right? What is credible for whom, and at what stage? At what stage you can say that this has been achieved? The Constitutional Court judges selection issue is something that goes deeply into any country's sovereignty. It goes deeply into the issue of Ukraine's sovereignty, but there we are working very hard to find solutions. The anti-oligarch law implementation is a bit a tricky one, because before the war, or before the full-scale invasion, excuse me, the EU and Western partners were not actually that happy with that law. But now we demand full implementation. The truth is, however, that the oligarchs have lost awful lot of influence in Ukraine. Some of them have lost awful lot of money. Quite a few of them are working hard and contributing to the war effort. And there are areas like media and others where their influence has diminished. So Ukraine actually implements this law without implementing each and every paragraph of this law. Then the national minorities framework law is being assessed currently by the Venice Commission, and you are aware that national minorities, persons belonging to them, it's always very sensitive issue with lots of stakeholders. So definitely further work is needed there. But all in all, I could also quote about a dozen concrete things that are being done, like appointing the NABU director, the anti-corruption agencies director, etc. And especially the crucial justice reform is proceeding really well. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more follow-up question. You indeed rightly mentioned the abolition of all customs duties and quotas for Ukrainian exports to the EU. As far as I know, this is extremely rare case, maybe even the first of such cases in EU's external trade policy, especially when we talk about agriculture that is usually quite highly protected by import duties. I wish that these temporary measures became permanent. Maybe the rule that there is nothing more permanent than temporary will apply in this case, but still, from the letter of European Commission explaining the renewal of this regime of preferences, I sensed that there might be weakening support among the member states to such regime. So I wanted to check what's your assessment. Do you think there will be enough support for extending again and again these kind of preferences?
Why didn't you ask Valdis Dombrovskis earlier today? He is in charge of the file, and actually he is in charge of getting the Commission's proposals through with the member states. No, I'm not part of these discussions, so I couldn't speculate here. I only reiterate that what I said earlier, that this is very sensitive trade area we are talking about.
Don't mention France, yes. I have a question to Zanda about a related topic. After the security conference in Munich, there are growing debates about potential fatigue of Western countries, including, of course, EU member states, to continue supporting Ukraine, that there is a lack of resources, especially military equipment, artillery, and things like that, and that there might also be political fatigue coming in if there is no visible progress in the battlefield made by Ukraine. So what's your sense about this? Will EU 27 and its institutions manage to maintain the same level of support as we have until now, and the same determination in terms of sanctioning entities and people in Russia, officials in Russia who are involved into war? What would be your assessment?
I think there is only one right answer, and it is the phrase we have heard often already, that we do not have any right to become tired or to allow the fatigue to grow. And that's the moral stance we are standing. Of course, the situation is not easy, as also already indicated with the example of the trade measures. Yes, it's not easy. The war is costing a lot also to the EU citizens in terms of inflation, in terms of the energy prices, in terms of the economic situation. But the situation will not become easier if anyone would propose to turn the back to Ukraine, because the war is in Europe. And as already mentioned previously by both of you, Europe has clearly said, where do we stand? We support Ukraine. So we cannot afford not to help Ukraine to win, because if Ukraine loses, if it goes too long, it's a loss of the EU. And I believe that this acknowledgement will help to reach all the agreements needed in Europe. So again, it will not be easy. It will not be 5 minutes. It can be night-length discussions on different aspects of the continued trade support measures, on continued microfinancial support, etc., etc. But we do not have right to not to continue that. At the same time, we as politicians, we have the duty to explain to our societies why we need to continue to support, why we need to increase the support, and that it is not only our moral duty, but if we calculate the costs for our societies as well, then helping Ukraine win and providing the material resources, military support, actually it decreases the cost for our societies in the long run. So it's both morally and also practically in our interests to help Ukraine as much as possible. Yes, there will be sometimes louder voices, sometimes more voices coming from different angles of the economy, like agriculture or some other production sectors. And then at that moment, it will be up to the politicians, would it be backbenchers or the leaders, to come into the debate and to show the leadership, to explain, and by that to manage to reach consensus in the EU again and again and again.
Thank you, Zanda. And I see that we now have a third member of our panel who was missing until now, Dr. Sławomir Debski, who is a director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. So Welcome, Slavomir.
I'm sorry. I had some urgent family business, so that's the reason I'm late. So I'm very sorry for that.
Well, you still have some time. We still have some time, so I suppose you also have introductory comments on the topic and EU's role in Ukraine. So I would immediately would like to give a floor to you now.
Thank you very much. Just a few remarks of providing a bit more strategic perspective that I usually provide. We have to remember, or we have to at least follow the debate concerning war in Ukraine in the United States. It goes without question that without Biden administration contribution to the Ukrainian cause, this war would have ended long time ago. So United States are playing a crucial role here. The question is whether this division of labor between Washington and Europe is rightly balanced. There are voices on the other side of the pond arguing that actually, as it is a European war, Europe should do much more, that Europe should actually take care of all business involved into this. So here we come to the issue of European Union and how Europe, how our institutions, how our community responded to that. Because usually diplomats, in responding to such reasoning of some of our American friends, say, well, we are not a security provider in terms of hard security, but we are absolutely crucial in providing sanctions, in providing humanitarian aid, with providing financial aid, and with providing actually all tools Ukraine's need to adapt itself to the requirements of EU membership, which is, actually twofold aim. It's not only about accession, but it is also about modernization of Ukraine. So these rhetorics are more or less like this. The problem is that, Russia's aggression on Ukraine created enormous deficit of security in Europe, for Europe, and for Europeans. European Union mostly were unable to respond to this deficit. Responded nation state, member state of, members of the EU, responded United States, responded the coalition of the free world, encapsulated with, a new format called the Ramstein format. I mean, those who provide hardware and weapons to Ukrainians. Yes, a flood of war refugees came to European Union, and again, the first responders were the member states, not the institutions. So here is the landscape, how we can move forward, because we have to bear in mind that perhaps European Union is not the best suited to react as a first organization and institution in the times of security crisis, but perhaps it will be able to create institutional and framework to stabilize situation after the war or during the war. Yes, European Union is absolutely crucial fighting with Russia on the second front, while the Ukrainians are trying to repel Russian aggression on the battlefield, are providing their blood and tears. But the European Union is effectively trying to minimize Russia's war potential, undermining financial resources, undermining its military potential. So it should not, this contribution should not be neglected. Of course, one may say that all these political decisions are being taken actually within the G7 format or G7 plus format, and then European Union is a kind of the implementation tool. Still, this political response should be highly valued. Political response, namely granting to Ukraine a candidate to European Union member status. It was a political decision, a kind of the message to the Russians that they attempt to divide Europe for the countries which do have a right to integrate themselves within the EU institutions, and all the others where Russia should have a say about the path and the model of development they want to take. Will not be accepted. That's the kind of the European Union political message. Of course, I have been in this business long enough to remember that actually Ukraine have been trying to get this membership, candidate to membership status already after 2004 and after Orange Revolution. So actually, we needed a Russian aggression. Russia's targeting civilians in Ukraine to respond in proper way. So in the way, we are obliged now to help Ukrainians to ultimately come into the European Union, because we failed them many years ago, and this our failure, unfortunately, in my view, boosted Russia's. That was a kind of the proof that making a noise against further enlargement is an effective tool of foreign policy of Russia. So now we are trying to overcome our mistakes. That's I think we should not give the ground to those who say as long as war continues, we cannot count, on much progress on the Ukrainian side with adaptation of the country to EU requirements, for very simple reasons. Now, Ukraine President Zelensky and Ukrainians, are on the front line. They do have the public attention, and their best ally now, putting pressure on European politicians, are general public in member states. So they have to use this, probably short window of opportunity to move the agenda as much forward as only possible. If war ends, and here, I'm not particularly optimistic. This war will last for some time. But if war ends, I'm afraid that this public attention and the public support for Ukraine may drop. And in these circumstances, the pressure on the European politicians would not be as high, as instrumental, as important as it is now. So I think there is no time to waste. That's my first conclusion. Second, European Union competes for the attention not only with its policy of supporting Ukraine not only in Europe but also in transatlantic relations. Where if Europe fails, if European Union fails, it could boost the positions and arguments of all those in the States who actually say that Europe for Europeans. They should all care about their own security, and Americans should actually limit their contribution and involvement in European security business. So I think that we need to use this momentum, bearing in mind these two very important factors. I stop here. Perhaps it was a bit too long as an introduction, but I was late, so again I'm very sorry for that.
Thank you. Well, we are glad you joined us. And yeah, I suppose Matti and Zander would probably have reactions to what you just said. I would just extend the argument about the importance of American leadership in reacting to Russia's war of aggression, and especially in terms of military support for Ukraine, where, as the data shows, American support is much more important than the one provided by the EU and its member states. And there is an argument in this discussion that EU was created as a peace project. From the very beginning, European integration was meant to bring peace through exchange, trade, and other types of mutual interdependencies. So EU is having huge difficulties in reacting to such military aggression as we see going on in Europe. So what else the EU could do? Of course, we know about so-called peace facility, which those funds that for the first time have been used to purchase military equipment and to assist Ukraine in such a way, but still the quantities are quite small. So Matti, what would you say? Can EU do more in this respect as a security actor, not only in terms of facilitating trade and providing incentives for domestic reforms through integration process, membership perspective, and so on?
Thanks a lot. The European Peace Facility is a case in point here. In December 2021, after long, exhaustive discussions among member states, the first decision to grant assistance to partner countries was adopted. Long and exhaustive discussions. Ukraine was among the first partner countries to receive assistance, 31 million euro. 31 million euro. It was considered a breakthrough. By now, the European Peace Facility has allocated 3.6 billion euro to Ukraine, and I think it's fair to say that the EU has risen to the challenge. The second thing I want to highlight is the European Union's training mission for Ukraine, operating in Poland and Germany for the time being. That was set up in record time as well, and by the end of this year already is targeting to having trained 30,000 Ukrainian service persons. And there's the proposal, by the way, by the Estonian government that has had a pretty strong tailwind lately of EU common purchasing of ammunition. If the EU could, in a very grave situation, commonly purchase vaccines, why couldn't the EU then pool its weight, actually? and commonly order and purchase ammunition. The target is the discussions are still underway, but from several players, from also different reasons, not only for supporting Ukraine quickly, but also from the angle of boosting Europe's industry. This proposal has met lots of support, and I'm sure that it will be adopted and will be implemented soon. So these all things are completely new. The EU has been able to rise to the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Zander, what do you think about French-German motor, which is so important for any EU project to succeed? But in this case, in terms of reacting to war, it seems like it's Baltic states and Poland that are setting pace rather than the traditional integration motor. I saw most recently news about the plans of Polish government to provide fighter planes mix to Ukraine. Again, where is France and Germany? What's your thought on this?
I think that our leadership is logical, because we are in the eastern flank of NATO, we are in the eastern flank of the EU, and we have direct experience from our own history. What does it mean if Russia attacks? We know from our own history how brutal the Russian army is, and how terrible it is. Just recently, there was a deputy speaker of the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada who visited Riga. And as part of her visit, she also visited the Latvian Occupation Museum that tells the story of Latvia between 1940 and 1945, when we were occupied by the Soviets, then Nazis, and then Soviets again. And when she came out of the museum, she said, it's terrible to see, but the history is repeating, because what we here in Latvia experienced in the 1940s, it is exactly what is happening today in Ukraine. And our experience and our historic knowledge explains why we were able to predict that Russia will attack, and why we are now leading this call for support for Ukraine. At the same time, allow me also to maybe broaden a bit this aspect, because Russia's attack on Ukraine is not only an attack on a sovereign country, it is a direct attack on the rules-based international order. After the Second World War, it was believed that rule of law will now dictate the international relations. It is forbidden to attack a sovereign country. It is forbidden to take territory of a sovereign country by force. But it is happening again. So how to stop it, and how to bring Russia to be responsible for that? So the only answer is involving the United Nations. Yes, the Security Council is paralyzed because Russia has veto on it. So it means that we need to get for everything clear vote in the UN General Assembly. For example, to establish the much needed ad hoc international tribunal to make Russia to be responsible for the crime of aggression. If we cannot have a decision by the UN Security Council, we need a decision by the 2/3 of the UN General Assembly. And here comes the role of the EU, the Germans, the French. There comes also the role of the US and all the democratic world. We need to continue to reach out to global south and much broader, because we need 2/3, and if more, even better for the decisions and for the votes in the UN General Assembly. And every time we have to explain what it is, and that what Russia is doing, it is not only attack on Ukraine, it is attack on the basic principles governing the international order today. And it means that if Russia will be left unpunished, if Putin will be allowed to go away, they will not only repeat it, but other dictators can try to repeat it in other parts of the world. So it means that we really need to work broader, and to support Ukraine, we need to bring many, many countries on board, being able, first of all, to vote in the UN, and then continue the support also broader.
Thank you. Well, we have only 1 minute left until the end of our session, so I would just like to give a quick last word to Slavomir. Will the EU manage to continue supporting Ukraine as long as it takes?
So here I'm optimist. As long as the member states are consequent and determined to provide this political support, as long as European society is on the Ukrainian side and stand by Ukraine, European institutions will follow. And I fully agree with Ambassador, who actually is doing an excellent job. European Peace Facility, European training missions, all are tools developed relatively quickly, because we have to bear in mind that this war was started in 2014. So after 6 years, we managed to create these new tools supporting Ukraine. Ukraine has to win. There is, the consequence of Russia, victory for Europe and peace in Europe will be disastrous. We will spend much more. We will be living in much more dangerous world. So we should do all in our all we can to support Ukrainian coast. Stand by Ukraine.
Thank you. Let's be optimistic, and I would like to thank all three speakers of this session. And well, we have to conclude.
You can have two speakers, and just to make a footnote about myself.
Okay, thank you all. Let's stay optimistic and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you.